Today we're going to dive a little bit deeper into Mike's journey, how you got into entrepreneurship, a little bit about his background, and then we'll jump into some of our growth discussions. Mike, welcome, and welcome to the Stripe office in Toronto. Yeah, we'd love to kind of get started from the beginning. Tell us a little bit about where you grew up and how you got into entrepreneurship.
Thanks for having me, Zane. A big shout out to Zane for hosting this whole series. I think, coming back from Australia and then investing in the Canadian tech ecosystem and helping share lessons learned from so many of the great founders we have in our ecosystem is much appreciated. So thank you for doing it, man. So I guess a little bit about me. I kind of fell in love with building companies at a young age. I grew up in a bunch of different places. I was born in Toronto. I spent most of my youth in the States, in Brooklyn, New York. And then I ended up going to U of T at a time when deep learning was really being invented. And so I was very fortunate to go to U of T at a time when Jeff Hinton was doing a lot of his pioneering research and ML was in the air. And I fell in love with, as I mentioned, doing really hard things. And one of the hardest things I could imagine doing was willing a company into existence. I'm sure that's a motivation for many of you in this room is the learning opportunities that doing hard things affords us. And the long story short is I started a company that was a very different business in the social search space. It's a B2C social search engine that was growing very quickly and encountered a customer service problem. And that ultimately led me to start Ada.
Amazing. So I know you worked in before jumping into Ada, you had a few of the other startups as well. And a lot of the insights for Ada came through those startups. And I know you did a lot of work yourself in customer service. So tell us a little bit about that kind of like journey, how you came up with the idea. How did you kind of validate that this is going to be a need? And how did you go about landing that first customer?
Yeah. So we in the previous company we started, as I mentioned, had this customer service problem. And the problem we experienced was essentially that our customer service got really bad as our business got bigger. And we started to observe that our relationship with our customers was changing. We went from treating our customers as anonymous, as like people we loved and whose feedback we craved, to these anonymous numbers as we were trying to keep at bay. It was this like really stark shift that happened as a function of growth. I kind of woke up one day and kind of looked at the state of our customer relationships at a bigger scale, and it really bothered me. It really bothered me how far away we had gotten from our customers, and so that led me to get really curious, as I think many of us are in this room. I became very curious about why it is, in general, that customer service tends to get worse the bigger a company gets. And I ended up cold calling as many customer experience leaders I get my hands on. And I spoke to a lot of them. And a lot of them told me the exact same thing. They said, customer service is a cost center. They said that I'm motivated to reduce the amount of contact my business is getting from my customers at scale. And by the way, I'm actually personally compensated the extent to which I do that well. And so when I heard that, probably the 12th time in a row, I started to become pretty opinionated that the world should probably work a different way. And that probably at some point there would be businesses who would figure out how to actually talk to their customers a lot more the bigger they got. And maybe the best businesses would figure out a way to actually offer a better customer experience the bigger they got, a more personalized customer experience the bigger they got. Maybe there's some sort of personalization flywheel that could be unlocked. And very long story short is that I spent a lot of time in the contact center. I went back to those leaders who had interviewed and asked if I could join their team, and 7 of them said yes. And so from a dingy office on the east end of Toronto, David and I, we worked as customer service reps for about a year in what would become sort of the first year of our company at Ada. And we learned very manually the challenges that are associated with building and providing great customer service at scale. And we gradually built technology that made us more productive. And we're still very much on that journey today. Like we continue to build technology that makes customer experience teams more productive and allows them to deliver experiences that they've always wanted to.
Yeah. And you mentioned, obviously you grew up part of your life in the US, high school, I think.
That's right.
In Brooklyn. And then you moved to Canada, you went to U of T. And I know you're very, very passionate about the Toronto in Canada ecosystem for startups. So tell us a little bit about what kind of kept you here. You have customers all over the world. Majority of them could be in the States, all over. Tell us about that decision on staying put here.
Yeah, I think, well, first of all, I think that question is too often framed from the perspective of like what kept you here as opposed to what is advantageous to about being here. And my perspective is that for Ada, Canada is the best place for us to be. It's actually an advantage for us as a company to be based in Canada. And there's a few reasons for that. The Toronto ecosystem in many ways is one of the AI meccas of the world from a research perspective. I think there's a claim that it's the most important one if you look at the state of today's technology and where the research actually originated from. I think second, from a talent perspective, we have some of the world's most favorable immigration policy. It's very easy to attract great talent to our ecosystem. And then third, from a diversity perspective, Toronto's literally the most diversity in the world. And so when you're looking to build experiences that billions of people around the world actually identify with and value. Toronto turns out to be an amazing place to do that from in Canada largely. That's the maybe the business reason. The personal reason is that I just firmly I have like a deep, deep desire to make sure that we as Canadian founders win. And I'm just like so tired of folks playing for second place. Like we as an ecosystem need to be less apologetic about our desire to win, and I think we need more conviction in ourselves and our ability to build some of the world's biggest businesses unapologetically from Canada. And so I'm very inspired by the opportunity that we all have as Canadian founders. I'm very inspired by, folks whose shoulders we're standing on, like the Harley and Toby's of the world at Shopify. And I'm really ready for there to be many more businesses like that are proudly Canadian.
Yeah, last month we had JJ talk, in the house. He had, we're talking about Rootly, and he told us about how he was the first employee at Ada. So it's
Exciting.
incredible to see founders coming out of Ada and building some incredible companies, landing big brand names. Rootly was also, a company that has some incredible brand names
Mm,
like Canva, NVIDIA, LinkedIn as customers, and Ada, same thing. Like you folks have some incredible customers. I know we have founders in the audience that are kind of also building in an enterprise space and trying to figure out how to like that first big name customer. What was kind of that day to day grind to land the first customer? AJ shared some
yeah.
insights on his process, but tell us a little bit about the early days on how you went about doing outreach, getting that early customer, and then landing those deals.
Happy to. So in our case, with Ada, I think this is probably even more true today because it's even more obvious that like inference is an analog for labor. What I mean by that is that like AI labor and human labor are interchangeable. What we did is we worked as customer service agents. We were paid for the outcomes that we were producing. And then one day without telling our managers, we let our AI produce the same outcomes and we continued to get paid. It was kind of the perfect A/B test. And that's when we knew we were really onto something. So our first customers didn't really know they were paying for our software. They were just paying for our service. And we were the ones who knew how the service was being provided. And we were very excited because we learned how to make the service delivery far more scalable. That's the value of AI, obviously. And so I think a lot of the first, like landing the first customer is less about it's less about a scalable outbound strategy or, some sort of growth tactic. It's much more about providing value that you're monetizing in any way possible. And hopefully, if you do it right, learning about some way you can deliver that value far more scalably. And that's the edge you have. That's what your product is. That's what your, unique perspective is as a founder. And I don't think you necessarily need to find that from your first customer, but probably from your first few, you'll find something that's scalable across how you're providing that service. I think a related thought is that I do feel like founders tend to focus too much on the number of customers they have and too much on growth broadly early on. And so folks think about, I think, scale of revenue prematurely, I might say. And I think what's much more important to focus on is the quality of revenue that you have, particularly in the early days. And one way I think of assessing your quality of revenue is to perform the following tests. Have someone who's much more neutral, speak to every one of your customers and ask them, what are you using this product for? And what value does it create? And unless the answer across all your customers is exactly the same, you are not ready to scale. Too often, we as founders kind of kid ourselves into thinking that we've, achieve what we've always wanted to achieve, a global brand that's infinitely scalable. And we think that our revenue is purer than it actually is. But I think one of the secrets I believe to like truly scalable growth is consistency in the value that you're creating. And I think that's the key thing to solve for, particularly in the early days.
Yeah, you folks have always kind of had a sales-led approach to landing, customers.
Mm,
There isn't a self-serve motion. Tell us a little bit about that decision. I think still it's very much a,
yeah.
sales-led
Mhm.
company. What was the early days of like putting that together, like hiring kind of the right team? I kind of followed your journey from the early days as well. I actually had some friends from high school actually join your company as well, leading
Oh,
sales. So
amazing. Okay.
um, but yeah, curious to learn more about how you built that out, that function, the process behind that decision.
So I guess two questions there. So the decision to be sales led versus product led in our growth started like certainly I come from a background that's very, very product oriented. So my DNA is to be able to use an app and not talk to a human. And I was extremely averse to the idea of introducing any friction at all on that process. So from day one, Ada was extremely focused on seamless self-serve onboarding experiences, um, and we did that for our early set of target customers who were actually very small mom and pop Shopify stores. And what we learned from that experience is that we could make these companies successful. But then we started to sign up some bigger customers. And then we kind of looked at the difference between these bigger customers and these smaller customers. And we realized it's actually the same amount of effort to manage and make one of these customers successful, but we can have like 10 times the impact. Like the literally like signing one of these big customers is the equivalent of signing, 10 of these smaller ones. And that led us to be much more empathic about the experience of a bigger customer navigating our company and discovering our company. And there's a whole debates around, of course, we could get into about, PLG and like the future of PLG, which I do think is changing right now. And I think the foundation model companies are really a good example of how it's changing and how there's multiple lines of growth, multiple journeys to and multiple customer segments. But to simplify it, our perspective was we're signing up bigger customers. We're focused on enterprise brands. And the way our enterprise target market buys is not through a self serve experience. They want to meet with us. They want to get to know our team. They want a much more consultative approach, as do we. We want to learn much more about the state of this company, its strategy, its people, before we elect to lean in and decide that they're a company we want to go after. And so that's how it evolved. And to answer the second part of your question, how is hiring a consequence of that? I think a lot of founders I speak to often think that the secret to scaling sales is hiring salespeople. And I've come to learn that at least in my case my experience is not actually the case. I've found that like scaling sales is much more a byproduct of figuring out how to scale yourself as a founder who's the face of the company, who's doing all the sales in the early days. And if you focus on how do you augment your own productivity, you'll end up one day with a large sales force that's doing exactly what you need them to do, but you won't be solving for that on day one. And I'm not sure if that nuance makes a difference. Like the way that nuance manifests is your first hire is not a head of sales. Your first hire is probably a really sharp sales specialist who joins every call with you and helps you go from managing 5 prospects to managing 10 prospects, to go from closing 1 deal a week to closing 3 deals a week. And that person learns the skill sets that are required to run your process, and hopefully they grow into a sales manager or a sales director or a sales leader and what have you. That was certainly the case for us. Like my first sales hire was Dan Code McNeil, who was a good candidate to be on this series. So Dan started as our first sales hire, helping me sell Ada, and grew to be our CRO and was at the helm for tens of millions of dollars in revenue creation. So, and huge team underneath him. But we didn't hire that that archetype on day one.
Oh, interesting. Tell us a little bit about like some of those, early days tactics. When it comes to like acquisition,
Yeah.
in previous series, we've talked about kind of the build, buy, partner
Mm.
approaches, right? So build, obviously, kind of like more product led approaches, buy a lot of kind of, obviously traditional ads and partnerships. What was some of those early acquisition tactics that worked the best for you folks?
Yeah.
What were kind of the day-to-day sales rituals that helped?
Aligning on specific outcomes that we wanted to drive for prospective customers. So we found that it's really easy to kind of get lost in the like feature functionality conversation. And it's easy to lose sight of like why is a customer actually buying you. And I do think this relates to the revenue quality conversation. There's a lot of revenue out there where that's associated with people just buying your technology because they think it's cool and not because it actually solves a deep problem. So a lot of the early tactics we learned were rooted in making sure that this customer is going to pay us if we deliver Y result. And it's up to us to figure out how to drive that result. They're probably interested in that, but the right customer for us is one who cares much more about the outcome and much less about the how. That was the first thing, and a lot of our strategy became a byproduct of that insight. I'd say maybe some of the second, like on the ritual side of things, we spent a lot of time helping our whole company really understand our customers, and that means going deep on explaining why did this customer elect to buy Ada? What were the challenges they experienced in acquiring our software? What are the early results they achieved in the first 30 days? And then we will often like bring a lot of our early customers to our office or Zoom them in. And the experience of surrounding our team with our customers was so important. I'd really encourage everyone to do that. I think it's really easy, particularly if you're not in a customer facing role, to kind of lose sight of like why we're doing this. And the mission remains like this, like, phrase on the wall. And the customers we forget are real people who have like real careers and real ambitions, and we're helping them. And so we should understand how we're doing that. The last thing I'd say is like a very valuable tactic is really from day one at Ada, we made part of our value, and I'd say a core pillar of our product's value. Um, we always saw through the eyes of our customers, and specifically, we've long made the claim that our product's job is to get our customers promoted. And what does that mean? It means that like our product needs to be aligned with the career path of the person who's buying it, which means we need to understand like what metrics that person in that position is being held accountable to, and what kind of results at their annual performance review they would need to be able to show to get a promotion. And I think a good example. This is an enterprise software, but a good example I think of a product or a technology partnership that like really delivers and is enduring is one where people who are up for promotion secretly attribute their promotions to you. That's the position I think you wanna be in. You want those folks to go like, "Man, it was like, thank you, I really appreciate it, I totally earned this." And then they call you after like, "Zane, I owe you 1,000,000. Thank you so much for making that happen." Right?
Yeah, it's always hard to like kind of get that trust of that first early, big serious customer. Like, what were some of the things that helped you gain that trust from those, bigger deals? Sometimes it's about like, the founders work at a certain company, they have that brand name backing. In your case, you had a bunch of startups before. How did you kind of build that trust with the customer?
I think I think this is even more true today because we are now living in an AI native world, and I'm sure all of you are building AI native software to some extent. I think so much of enterprise sales comes down to the personal relationship. It's so true. You could have the best bottom up motion ever and the stickiest technology ever from a technology perspective, but if you're going to go wall to wall across the enterprise, or you're going to unlock the long standing commitment that allows you to book a way bigger contract than you would ever, that's gonna require you looking someone in the eyes and telling them like you can trust me. So much of that I think in the early days comes from us personally as founders instilling that trust in the folks who are betting on us. And the old adage that like no one ever got fired for buying IBM rings true to this day. Like no one ever got fired for like going with Microsoft. But people get fired for taking a bet on some founder who shows up one day with an amazing demo and then dips, like doesn't ever comes back. So I think it's about overcoming that. And what you have against Microsoft is like you're the founder and you're showing up. And most deals that Microsoft is involved in, their founder is not showing up. Interestingly, their founder does show up for continue, which is amazing for a number of their still big deals. It just says a lot about how to build an enduring business. But we have an advantage as earlier stage founders in a lot of those cycles by virtue of us showing up and being sincere.
Yeah, interesting. In the early days of Ada, curious, like what were some of the objections that would constantly come up, as
Oh,
you were
that's a good
so
question. I mean, I've been building in applied AI for a long time, so I've heard a lot of objections around AI. My customers don't want AI. AI doesn't work. AI is scary. AI is going to take my job. AI is not controllable. AI will hallucinate. Like I've heard every objection. What I haven't heard is someone who objects to improving the quality of their customer experience, reducing their wait times, driving more efficiencies in their operations. And this goes back to the importance of anchoring on the outcomes that we're driving. Often, there are objections. There might be objections in how the value you're delivering, how you're delivering your value, but those are easy to navigate if you've instilled the confidence that you're going to deliver the outcome that they care about. So I'd say I've put most of them under that bucket.
Yeah, totally. And in the early days as well, like pricing is always a bit of a
Oh
challenge,
yeah, I've
right?
got a good pricing story.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So, I know folks here, quite a few folks building in the enterprise space, trying to figure out how
yeah.
should they price their product. Tell us a
Mhm.
little about your journey, how you came up with your pricing.
So one of our first large enterprise, like Fortune 500 deals, I showed up on site. This was for a large telco, and I met the VP who was responsible for their customer experience, and I gave them my pitch, my demo. We've been talking a little bit, and then she just loved what I showed her, and she said, Can you be here a little bit longer? Like, I'd love to show Ada to some of my colleagues." And then so I was like, "Yeah, sure." And then she proceeded to bring me up a floor, and I demoed it to, her boss, and I demoed it to her colleague, and I gave like 5 demos in a row. It was like a demo marathon. And then she said, "Look, I know, we're gonna try to fast track this process. So could we meet in the boardroom like this afternoon and we can discuss, how to actually roll this out?" Wow, this is amazing. Sure. And keep in mind, at this point, most of our customers are like small SMB businesses, literally like small Shopify stores. And so I'm like, this is amazing. Enterprise sales is amazing. And I'm brought into this boardroom, and there's, the VP, there's the SVP, and then there's someone from finance and procurement. And they said, "Mike, we've seen everything we need to see. The team's been amazing. You've been amazing today. We want to buy Ada. How much does it cost?" And I was like, and at that time, our customers were paying us $500 a month to use Ada. And I was like, $5,000 a month. Because I thought that was like a huge number at the time. I was like, and they looked at each other, like they paused, they were like, okay. And what I learned from that moment was that pricing strategy should be about chasing a no. It's not about finding a yes. And if you find yourself in a position like I found, where your customer says yes to your initial pricing, you have screwed up majorly. It took me 2 years to unwind that decision, by the way. Like we had to commit to the pricing, and pricing ended up being like 10x that. Like it was like I like so undershot our value, like dramatically. It was like a terrible mistake. But the point is that in that moment, my default was, well, what are they going to say yes to, and what's a big number for me? Which I think what many of us sort of think about. But instead, what I should have been looking for is, obviously I should have been working backwards from the value I thought we were going to create, which is like, $100 million business case or something, and we'll capture 10% of that, or something like that. Uh, and I should have gotten them to say, "Understand where you're coming from. No, I don't think we can make that specific plan work, but let's work on it together." That would have been the ideal outcome from that meeting. So I encourage you guys to chase the no and not the yes.
Yeah, interesting. And how have you like evolved your pricing over the years? I know you folks have, your process right now
Mhm.
is people go onto the website, they schedule a demo, you have a team of people that are kind of trained to work with customers. How do you kind of coach them to do that? How to sell properly and figure out what the right
Yeah.
pricing should be for that customer?
For us, our pricing at Ada is it's long been a function of the volume of conversations that we're powering for you, and it's become more complex now. It's a function of access to our platform, the volume of conversations we power for you across all channels, and there can be different prices by channel. Voice conversations are a little bit more expensive than messaging conversations, for example. And then we have a services component too, where we give you access to ongoing consulting that helps you get more value out of our partnership over time. And so the way that our team has learned to explain this to a customer is to work with them on it. We have quite robust ROI models that we give to our customers, and we allow them to plug in their numbers, and we show them the kind of value we're going to be able to create together. We align on what a great outcome would look like over a 3-year, 4-year period, and then we design a plan that gets them there starting from today. And that's what the customer success plan looks like. But it's embedded very early on in the sales cycle, and it's the map we're trying to give our customers. And I think honestly, that's what so much of what enterprise sales is about. It's about understanding where your prospect wants to go and giving them the map to get there.
Yeah, absolutely. And then in terms of, so, we've talked about like, getting those early customers, how you price. How do you think about retention, right? Especially in these days where you have a lot more competitors than your early days. And how do you approach it within the team?
Yeah, I think, I mean, I think about retention along 2 lines. I think a lot about NDR, so your net dollar retention. How much are your accounts, your customers expanding with you or contracting with you? And then I think a lot about gross retention, like how many logos are you retaining? And I think both of them need to be addressed and thought of actually quite separately. I think it can very well be the case that, you can have super high NDR and actually low GRR, and you can also have the opposite. So I think it depends on what your strategy is as a company. In our case, so many of our customers are still in the process of rolling out ADA more and more and more and more because we've only recently been able to extend ADA to new communication channels. So when we were working together with Uzane, we were only available in messaging, but you were you were getting emails, you were getting text messages, you were getting social threads, you were getting phone calls, and so now you can deploy your customer facing agent with data in every channel. And so that makes us think about NDR in new ways. Our NDR ambitions are actually like quite ambitious. We believe that if we're doing our job for you, every conversation that you're having with your consumer, with your customer across any channel, Ada will be helping make better. So that's a little bit how we think about it. I think on the like broadly tactics around retention and expansion, I think it's like super valuable to be extremely critical of your early losses. Everybody loses customers. You'll have customers who churn. I think it's really important to be like very clear-eyed and sober about why those customers have left you so that you can improve. And one way to do that is like similar to the other tactic I gave earlier in our chat today, is to have a third party do it. I think it's super valuable to, I mean, both are valuable. Talk to yourself, but third parties, you can ask a series of questions around, was the value being delivered? Why wasn't it? What would it needed to be different for that customer to stay?
Great. We've talked a little bit more, like a lot on the growth side. I want to shift towards
Mm,
more on the product side,
yeah.
right? I'm curious, like what are you finding companies are measuring wrong when it comes to like AI and customer experience? How are you kind of thinking about kind of core product, getting it to the kind of where it needs to be with your future vision?
Yeah, I think in our space, like so many companies think about this the wrong way. They think about AI as being a cost reducer. So they think a lot about AI's value being to deflect or reduce contacts. And I always tell our customers that if the value you were chasing was just to reduce costs, we would recommend just getting rid of your phone number, shut down your website. You won't have anyone contact you and you'll save a lot of money. It's obviously not the goal. The goal is to improve your customer experience. The goal is to power a better experience. In fact, so much better that people are going to pick you over your competitors. Your customers are going to stay with you longer. Their lifetime value is going to go up and your growth is ultimately going to accelerate. That's what we anchor on. Ultimately, like we think of ADA as a customer lifetime value machine. It's our job to increase your customer lifetime value. And we do that by empowering your team to manage agents that deliver extraordinary experiences. That's how we approach it.
Right. And what do you think is like overhyped right now in the like,
Man,
customer experience?
what isn't overhyped right now? Like I do think we're living in the era of just crazy hype. I know we all kind of feel it. I think what we see in our sales cycles is that customers are now feeling that too. So I'm sure many of you are in this world know that there's very much a premium on like touching and actually using software in production. uh, not just like seeing a demo. It's never been easier to create a compelling demo. It's never been easier to build something that looks like it works. It still remains quite challenging to deploy something at scale in production that's secure and hardened and works globally. And so I think living in that space is an advantage if you choose to. I think it's also just the case that, you know, we live in a time when it really pays to be optimistic. Like anyone who is skeptical about AI's impact probably needs to like update their priors. They probably need to like really deeply understand the rate of this technology's improvement. They probably need to like use the technology more themselves. They probably need to appreciate that there is a massive like capability overhang right now, and these models are like far more capable than like their actual usage would suggest. And so there's such a premium on like use case discovery, on experimentation, on usage. it's like the golden era for building software right now. So I just think it's like an incredible time. So, in that way, like some of the hype is definitely warranted. And I think you just have to prove it. You'll be rewarded if you prove it.
Yeah, absolutely. It's such a great
Mm.
opportunity to build something right now, and such a
It's
great time to
amazing.
be in. I'm going to ask a few rapid fire
Yeah,
questions, and then we're going to give plenty of time for the audience to ask you
let's
questions.
do it.
All right. So, what's one growth lever more companies should be using right now?
Hopping on a plane.
Nice. One
For-
thing, yeah, totally. I think that's pretty common with your type of business and any type of business now.
I'm in your neck of the woods today or tomorrow. Can we meet in person?
Love that. One thing you'd stop doing immediately if you were a founder.
Probably going on X.
Nice.
I love X, and you need to be on X to keep up with the pay, with what's happening in AI. You need it, but like you also don't need it. So it's a tension. But I'd say maybe limit your X usage.
Yeah, just so much over information everywhere. Most overrated metric in SaaS,
Revenue.
and what's the most underrated?
I would say something like cohorted engagement, something like
Mm,
that.
yeah. And what do you think is like the best way to win your first enterprise customer?
Work for the company.
Work for the company. Biggest mistake founders make with AI today?
I don't think they use it enough themselves.
Yeah, I know how deep you are with I was at your demo at the
Mm.
Claude Code meetup. If anyone hasn't watched his demo, go on. I think you put it on LinkedIn and stuff, so see how he uses Claude Code. One company you think is executing extremely well right now?
Turbo Buffer.
Turtle Buffer,
Turbo Buffer.
Turbo Buffer.
Yeah. Yeah. Anyone use Turbo Buffer? Turbo Buffer is an Ottawa-based company. They accelerate um, your uh, your the speed of your inference,
Interesting.
and they're doing great, and they're just a great company, and their technology is working really well.
Interesting. We'll have to get the
Mm.
founder here. And one habit that made you a better CEO?
Writing.
Writing, definitely a good way to think, right?
Mhm.
Makes you a better thinker as well. And lastly, one piece of advice you'd give your younger self.
I would say, like, remember that what's actually most fun is the journey.
Yeah, you got to have the fun along the way, right?
It's so true. I mean, every founder I speak to who's made it and achieved everyone's wildest dreams. What all of them have to share in common is like it's better when you're in it. So even when you feel like it's super hard and it's like super challenging, it's like a dark day. Know that like we signed up for this, and it is a privilege to be able to work on something that's super challenging and test us like it does. And I think yeah, I think I would try to remind myself of that more.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Mike.
Yeah.
Let's give a big round of applause to
Cool.
Mike.
Thanks, guys.
We're going to pass it on to the audience now to ask questions. We have plenty of time. So,
Yeah, let's get into questions.
Hi, love the talk. Learned a lot already. You said something interesting. You didn't really go into it more, but you said that PLG is changing, product-led growth. I'd love to learn more about how you think that's changing and where you think that's going. And yeah, I guess for B2B, I'm kind of between B2B and B2C. Kind of curious, like what your thoughts are on that.
I mean, I think it's so complicated. I mean, one way to think about it is that it hasn't changed. It's just that some companies are adopting both PLG and enterprise motions at the same time. And Anthropic's a great example of this. Like, how many of you use Claude Code? Like all of you, I'm sure. How many of you spoke to Anthropic to set up Claude Code? Like, probably did any of you? No, right? So I think that's a good example. And yet, what is the growth of what's driving Anthropic's growth? It's actually their enterprise motion. So they're getting into enterprise accounts because of a great PLG motion, but they're expanding these accounts and locking in these long-term agreements because they have a sophisticated enterprise traditional approach. And the reality is that, like in our company, we wouldn't have gone wall to wall Claude Code had we not spoken with. We actually needed to speak to someone at Anthropic to make that happen. Like, we needed assurances around our customers' data. We needed specific commitments made by them. We needed a bunch of things that, like, you're just not going to trust. Most people probably aren't going to trust a website, or may not even be possible for just like a self-serve experience to provide. And if it is, there's going to be a large segment of the market that won't prefer that. They'll prefer speaking with someone and looking you in the eye and going, like, I'm about to write you a huge check. This is going to work, right? So I think those dynamics are at play, and I think we're not very far from a world where those start to really blur in interesting ways, right? Like, if Anthropic had sent an agent to the meeting we had, like, would that have gotten most of the way there today? Like, maybe. I don't know. So it is sort of the wild west, I think, ahead. But I do think it's interesting that what's common amongst some of the fastest growing businesses in the world is they haven't chosen. They've done both. They've done all.
One quick follow up.
Yeah.
Is it that it builds trust, or is that it's like a distribution lever? Like, what is it about the product and then like the enterprise or like your sales on the back end? Like, does a product create trust for the sale that happens like thereafter, or
Yeah.
like
I mean, I think
distribution?
one way to think about the consumers, the bottoms up approach is on the consumer side, I guess, in Cloud Code's case, it's still a self-serve enterprise motion. Is that if you think about a seller at Anthropic, they could choose to outbound to a customer, a business that doesn't have any Cloud Code users, or they could choose to outbound and engage with a business that already has 100 Cloud Code users. Like, which one are they going to pick? So many of these decisions are kind of like already made for you. Just talk to like one of your smart sellers and ask them like, which of these two companies would you rather engage with? They'll tell you pretty clearly. So I think that's probably why it works. All of this is just a downstream of like the obvious fact that in the example we're giving, like it's an incredible product that works and everyone loves, and so that's a sort of necessary precondition. I would imagine for you to be able to layer on multiple motions at once.
So I have some questions about how you use Cloud Code and like counterintuitive ways or like non-obvious ways you use it. And I saw your post on LinkedIn, and I was curious also, like for example, the ADA MD file, like who
Yeah.
manages that in your
Oh
company, and
man,
like who
great
can
question.
edit?
Yeah. So if anyone doesn't know, like ADA has the equivalent of a Claude MD file, like for a company. So it's essentially the operating manual for a company, the core set of instructions that we want every employee to have in their context window. And it like literally is a file that is on everyone's like Cloud Code, like in their Cloud Code directory. So it's also like literally in context as well as like metaphorically being in context. Short answer is I don't know. I don't know who manages it. Like right now, I manage it. I think that's probably relatively scalable. I'm not too worried about that right now, but there's like it's one set of instructions that is the mission, vision, core behaviors, core strategy. Yes, nos, Quark's a better company, vernacular, things that you keep in your head all day as a founder that you just want everyone to know all times. And so that's how I've approached it so far. Thought a lot about like how did that scale? Like I'd probably get to the point where like, yeah, there's some like sophisticated approval system with like, voting and shit where like, you get someone proposes a change to the manual and it's on the blockchain and it all, I don't know, like it bubbles up. I just think that, I'm really struck about how much value is being created by markdown files right now. And like, that's kind of a beautiful metaphor, right? It's like, wow, who would have thought that markdown files would create so much value today? And so I am also simultaneously trying to like keep things simple, and keeping it simple can just be like, look, I'll own this file, want it in everyone's head, and we'll update it as we go.
Yeah. We also have one in our startup, and I manage it, and I'm really curious about like how it scales as well. But also I'm thinking like how it can like update itself.
Yeah.
With the interaction with the employees and with the customer.
Yeah, that's a really cool. I'd love to talk to you more about that.
Yeah.
It'd be interesting to like have those updates like flagged to you so you can understand if your culture is evolving in the ways you want it to. Interesting. Yeah, please.
Hi, Mike. My name is Berto. I'm in a GTM role for a company that serves Fortune 500 clients. So I really appreciate the questions you asked. They're right aligned with what I was going to ask. But in terms of, you mentioned Dan and like his first initial role as like a GTM sales person in your company. Like, what made him so successful being someone who wasn't a founding member, or I don't know if he was a founder of the company, and what really impressed you about what he did for the company?
Good question. So, yeah, I hired Dan as our first sales person. He is a founder. So he was actually working on a different company, and I was working on a startup at the time that I met him. And what made him so successful, I think, was a few things. One was his drive, common amongst founders. Two was his coachability, like he's extremely coachable. And then three was just like his insatiable curiosity. And so the way that would show up is, like day one, Dan joined me for a meeting with a prospective customer. I asked him to create the discovery deck. He created the deck. I said it was terrible. I gave him a ton of feedback on how to improve it, and he just ate it up. And we just rinse and repeat that process for years. And I learned a ton from him over the course of that. And he learned a lot from me and our process as a course of that. And we both grew a lot. So I'd say that was what was common. And I think it's worth noting that like a lot of us sort of say that we like feedback, and like we're all kind of trained to like say that like feedback's a gift. I think if you're being really honest, like how like do you really like feedback? No. Feedback is like really hard and it's difficult and it makes you feel uncomfortable. It takes work to say like, could you please like genuinely tell me how I could do that better? Genuinely. I'm gonna like create the actual space for you to like honestly tell me how I can be better as a CEO. Not in some sort of like, like a fake way, but in a genuine way. And he did that very well. That's what I'm trying to say.
Hi, Mike. Thanks for coming today. My name is Davis. I'm building a voice AI recruiter for companies that want to hire at scale. So we conduct their interviews. A couple of the leads, the companies that we're working with for our pilot, they are skeptical because with compared to chat boxes, let's say AI chat boxes, voice agents, having a humane voice instead of just text kind of represents the company more. I would say would kind of represent our clients more. So clients are really scared that if the voice goes off rail, that, there would be a couple pushbacks by the candidates that would be applying to the roles at their companies. My question is, for the voice agents that you guys have at Ada, how have you guys, gone about it from a technical point of view to make sure, or technical and customer engineering point of view, to make sure that your customers trust that this agents you're providing can, represent their companies in, I guess, the best way? That's kind of my question. Thank you.
Yeah, maybe I could answer your questions like slightly different way. I would say if you're open to like me reframing it, I would say that like you are in the business of reducing a company's time to hire or improving an employer brand in the recruitment process or helping companies hire hard to attract talent. Like you're not a voice agent company. That's what I'm trying to say. Like you are a company that is improving some part of the recruitment process for businesses. It's not clear what part based on how you've articulated it, but I would anchor first on that part, on that component. The voice AI is just like the way you would solve that problem, but it might be getting in the way right now. I wonder. Yeah, that's how I would kind of approach that. And the reason I say that is because at Ada, like we are a customer experience company first and foremost, and an applied AI business second, which means that if another technology were to come around that was not AI related and it would help us help our customers deliver a better experience, we would use that. We would be like hard not AI, anti AI immediately, because our mission is about making customer experience extraordinary for everyone. And so for you, there's some component that's probably clear in your head about like how you make the recruitment process or the hiring process extraordinary for brands. And I would like zero in on that. And that might help you identify kind of some of the technology gaps you might have today that you can solve. And you could probably work with your customers to solve if you're really aligned on the outcome you're going to drive for them. Is that helpful? Yeah. Cool.
Hi, Mike.
Hey.
Thank you so much. I've been to the Ada office a few times for Build Canada events, so love the work that you guys are doing. I'm coming from a little bit of a bit different background. I'm in the immigration tech and policy space. And I always wonder, why do companies like Ada, I guess, not work with something like the government? And I understand like there's money to be made in the enterprise sector. That's a no-brainer. But there are a lot of customer service experiences that we all have to go through when it comes to government institutions, whether they're municipal, provincial, federal, whether it's related to like calling about your taxes or getting something like renewal of your driver's license. And there's questions that you have sometimes, and it's genuinely a horrendous process in every way, shape, and form. So why do companies like Ada never target, I guess, the public sector and government when it comes to like selling or integrating their services?
Historically, it's been because it's been easier to sell to other verticals or other segments. It's just like the simple reality is that the same reason I mentioned at the onset that we learned early on that it was easier to acquire a bigger business than a small business. A lot of companies have concluded that it's much easier to acquire a private customer than a public one. With Ada specifically, like put a pin in your question. We got some like big announcements coming out on that front soon. So it's something we're working on.
Next would be me. Hello, my name is Ziad. You mentioned something that was very interesting. We work with a lot of SMBs in e-commerce, interestingly enough. And you mentioned that in terms of impact, working with one enterprise customer is like working with 10.
Mhm.
e-commerce SMBs. In my experience, I have found that smaller companies don't care as much as larger companies simply because it is not as big of a problem for them. They may not have the leadership in place, it's not a priority, and so on and so forth. So, the question that I have been battling with, in a sense, is it in vain? Is it a lost battle that we might want to make better software for them or bring in better ways for them to be running on, but they might not feel the pain as much? So, should I just give up and look at bigger clients, or should we continue to fight the good fight to create better software for segments of SMBs that might not even recognize that this problem exists just because they're not of the size or the scale where it's become an issue for them?
Wonderful question. I can hear it in your voice that we need you to represent the SMBs of the world and that you are their savior. Look, I think you kind of answered what I was going to, you alluded to what I was about to say. I think impact needs to be defined for yourself. Like in my case, impact is a function of the conversation volume that we power. Our mission, make customer experience extraordinary for everyone. That means that we want to power every customer service conversation in the world. And so if I'm choosing between a business that has 1 million conversations a year or 100 million conversations a year with their customer base and a business that has 1,000, it's more mission aligned for me to pick the bigger customer first. It could be more mission aligned. That's the caveat. So I think it's a strategy decision. We made the decision to focus on the bigger companies. That may not be the same thing for you. It may be more mission aligned for you to focus on smaller companies. It's probably the case that the smaller companies have different problems than the bigger companies, and we see this time and time again, right? Like look at HubSpot. They're probably the best example of a publicly traded SaaS business that is focused on SMB. They don't have that many enterprise businesses as customers, and they've made it work. And there was a long-standing view held by the bears that HubSpot would never be able to be a public company, that would never scale because they at some point would need to figure out how to go in the enterprise. Not true. That's not true. So I think it sounds like your passion is with the SMBs. It sounds like they need you, and I suspect that the problem that you're solving for them, if you could understand it better than anybody else. That kind of actually brings me to a point I wish I'd made earlier. Like I do think one of the strengths that we as founders have, one of our competitive advantages, is the opportunity to understand a problem better than anyone else. Like you're never going to have the same level of resourcing as all your competitors, incumbents. You're never going to have the same depth of team, the same sophistication of strategy. But one thing you can genuinely be the best in the world at is you can genuinely understand a problem better than anyone else. That is 100% in your control. And so um, I would encourage you to make that your competitive advantage. And if that brings you to solving SMB's problems, power to you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. First of all, thank you for having us. Thank you for coming out and speaking today. I saw an interview that you did, I think it was in 2020. This was a bit of a while back where you were talking about how when you were wrapping up your last startup, you were so disappointed that you went to lunch with your first investor and then passed him a note and you just couldn't look him in the eyes. I think something that I'm really curious about is psychologically, what's kind of going through your head at that point? And then now that you're working on this startup it's a big success now, how do you kind of look back on that? And so I guess it's kind of two questions, what was going on between your ears and then, how does that kind of fit in with your narrative right now?
Great question. So just to give everyone the same context is, when I pivoted the business into what would become Ada, I felt like a real failure. And I went to our lead investor and asked him for lunch to come to lunch. And I wrote out what was going on with the company and my decision to pivot it into this space. And I felt an extreme amount of anxiety and guilt associated with having to do this. And my perspective at the time was that he was going to ask for his money back, that, I had failed as the CEO and founder of a company, and that the lunch, let's just say wasn't going to go well. And instead, what I found is that he was extremely supportive. He didn't even read the letter. And he said, what are we going to do next? Give me the ideas. What are you thinking about inside the customer service world? And so, looking back on that, I do feel like I definitely misjudged the situation. I now have a much greater appreciation for the fact that when folks back us as founders, they're backing us. They're backing you as a person and your potential and what you can potentially create. They're not investing in what you have today. And I think that's a really important reminder. I think that's a good example of how good investors show up. I think there are examples of investors who don't do that, and I would put them in a different category. But that was one of the core lessons I think I learned. Like related to that, I think it's so clear that um, so much value is created. Um, uh, like so much value is created by wonderful teams that the folks who back you could never anticipate. Like, who would have thought that NVIDIA would be the most valuable company in the world today? Like 30 years ago, or 20 years ago, who would have thought that? Who would have thought that a company that makes GPUs, graphical processing units for video games, would be the number one AI company in the world? No one would have thought that. But a lot of people who backed Jensen wouldn't have been surprised that he would be the person who could figure that out. And I think that that's a core lesson. I try to show up that way in the companies that I back as an investor these days. And I try to remember that we are always a function of our potential, and not only what we've created so far. Thank you.
Hi, Mike. Thank you for the talk. I'd like to ask you about your take on professional services. You mentioned consulting is something that Ada offers some customers. I always find it super interesting to hear, especially from AI company founders, a focus on the human element. You mentioned hopping on a plane, looking people in the eyes, and professional services. I work in professional services at Sprout Social. I used to do it at Adobe. There are a lot of nuances between how each company approaches it. In my case, I saw one company bills for it, another does it for free for larger customers. One is really an agency style model, another is a consulting style model. How do you approach it? How do you view it? And especially from the lens of a company who is automating a lot of consultative functions in your customers, how do you view empowering your professional services team with AI?
So lots in there. I think so. Services, consulting, professional services, forward deployed engineering. There are so many different approaches to complementing your core offering in today's market, and I think they probably vary a lot by industry and by application that you're offering. It's also the case right now that 5 years ago, services revenue had a really low multiple associated with it. But now, if it's AI services revenue, it has a super high multiple associated with it for some reason. That might be a function of the fact that all work is just work. And if it has AI in the work, it gets a 20x multiple. And if it has human only in the work, it's a 2x multiple. There's probably an arbitrage opportunity in there for folks who are paying attention. I don't know what the dominant strategy is, universally. There probably isn't one. In our business, we are so focused, as I mentioned, on enabling the world's ACX teams to run on Ada. So these are new organizations, new teams, agentic customer experience teams that use our software. And there's a lot of change management associated with setting up that team, making sure that both organizationally and technically. And so there's a lot that is involved in that process. And it's really valuable work. And increasingly, that is work that we either do ourselves or we will bring in partners who will perform it. So that's how we kind of think about it. We think about it being both a necessary component to make our customers successful, and a distribution channel for us as we enable other partners to perform it. Yeah.
How do you measure the success of it? Is it education? Is it what's your main goal that you tell your professional services team? Are you trying to reduce churn? Are you trying to get them indirectly excited about the new channels or features, or what is?
It's about adoption. It's about adoption. Yeah, it's about adoption. So we want to help this customer get increase their maturity, and that maturity could be from day one, to help them get off the ground quickly, or it could be, hey, help them get to the next level. It depends.
Yeah, thank you again, Mike. I have a quick question on the product level. How do you keep up with all the changes that happen in the AI space? And for voice in particular, how do you think about that great customer experience or creating that customer experience with kind of imperfect models that we have today?
So I would say on the pace of change, how do we keep up? We work really hard, and our team stays on top of model development. I'd say that's the honest truth. We just use a lot of new technology all the time. What helps is we have very robust evals inside Ada. So it's now very easy and almost full. It is almost a fully automated process for us to be able to assess the performance of a new model, for example, and know if it works for us and it's actually going to improve a component of our system. So our assessment or evaluation infrastructure, I guess you could call it, has become much more mature over the last year. That's been a very worthwhile investment. So that's one thing we do. On the voice experience side of things, I think your question is like, how do I think about the future of that, or what's the best?
I mean, like with the imperfect models that we have, how do
Yeah.
you kind of think about making that experience great? Like, how do you approach that?
Okay, so here's where I've learned that it really pays to understand what components of your product roadmap are going to benefit from rising intelligence, improved model performance, and which parts of it are going to be consumed by rising intelligence and better model performance. And there's only really two buckets. Like you're either building something in your product that like GPT-6 is going to cannibalize, or you're building something in your product GPT-6 is just going to make even better. And I think in general, we all want to be building products that are like mostly in the latter camp and not in the former camp. And it will pay to like be quite opinionated about where those fall. In the case of voice, they'll always fall in both buckets right now, because there are things that we're building in our voice experience that are really making up for model inadequacies or model shortcomings. But we're going into that eyes wide open. We know that when next generation model comes out, when speech to speech models mature, when context windows expand, when processing times fall, like these things we're doing will not be necessary. And that's okay, because the majority of what we're building will only get better. I will only benefit. So that's how we think about it. And then on the experience side, a couple quick thoughts there. First, we try to build everything backwards from the actual end user experience that we're providing. And the 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 way we think about that is like, first we think about the best experiences that we've ever had in our own day-to-day lives, and then increasingly we really try to push our teams to imagine what could be even better. And I think we are living, for those of us who are applying AI to create value today, I do think many of us run the risk of simply automating the work that exists in today's physical, manual, like human-centric world. And we run the risk of failing to see the opportunities that didn't exist pre-AI. And that, I think, is about to become the much more interesting space. Another way of answering that question is, what is now possible that wasn't before that we should consider creating? And there's a lot under the umbrella of voice that I know it sounds like you personally are exploring. So I think that's a really germane question.
All right. That's all the time we have for questions. Let's give it another big round of applause to Mike